My sister never wanted love. Not really. Love required patience, honesty, and a kind of vulnerability she never had. What she wanted was attention, control, and most of all, victory. And for as long as I could remember, victory for her meant one thing: taking whatever was mine and making sure I knew it. It didn't start all at once. It never does. Things like this grow slowly, quietly, like cracks in glass that spread until the whole surface shatters. When we were younger, people used to say we were close. Two sisters, only a few years apart, sharing clothes, secrets, laughter. But even back then, there were signs. Subtle at first. Easy to ignore if you didn't look too closely. I remember my 10th birthday. I had spent weeks talking about the small party my parents had planned. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few friends, a cake, and decorations I had picked myself. Pink and gold balloons, a dress I loved. Everything exactly how I wanted it. Vanessa watched quietly the entire morning, her eyes following every detail, every compliment I received. By the time the party started, she had already changed into something almost identical to my outfit. Same color, same style, even the same ribbon in her hair. People laughed it off, said it was cute, said she looked up to me. But when my friends started complimenting her too, I saw the way she smiled, not happy, not proud, just satisfied. That was the first time I felt it. That strange, uncomfortable feeling that something wasn't right. But I pushed it aside. She was my sister after all. As we got older, the pattern became harder to ignore. In middle school, it was friends. Girls I spent months getting close to would suddenly drift toward Vanessa. She knew exactly what to say, how to act, how to become whatever they needed her to be. And once she had them, once they laughed with her instead of me, she lost interest just as quickly. By high school, it wasn't just friends anymore, it was boys. The first one was harmless. At least that's what I told myself. His name was Daniel. He sat behind me in class, passed me notes, made me laugh when I was having a bad day. It felt simple, innocent, the kind of thing that makes you believe in small beginnings. I didn't even tell Vanessa at first. I had learned by then to keep certain things to myself. But secrets have a way of slipping through cracks, especially in a house where nothing truly belongs to you alone. One afternoon, she saw a message pop up on my phone. That was all it took. Within a week, Daniel was texting her. Within 2, they were talking. By the end of the month, he barely looked at me anymore. When I asked him about it, he shrugged like it was nothing. Said things just changed. Said Vanessa understood him better. Vanessa didn't even keep him. She got bored within weeks. Dropped him like he was nothing. But by then, the damage was done. And that's how it always went. Every time I let someone in, every time I allowed myself to feel something real, she would appear. Smiling, charming, effortless. She didn't need to try hard. People were drawn to her naturally. And she used that. Not to build something meaningful, but to take something away from me. I tried talking to my parents once. Just once. I told them how it made me feel, how it wasn't just coincidence anymore. My mother sighed, barely looking up from what she was doing, and said the same thing she always did. She admires you. You should feel lucky. Lucky. That word stayed with me for years. By the time we became adults, I had learned to adapt. I kept my life separate. Or at least I tried to. I moved out as soon as I could, built a quiet routine, focused on my work. I didn't cut Vanessa off completely. It's not that simple when it's family. But I kept my distance. Limited what I shared. Chose my words carefully. For a while it seemed like it was working. Until Marcus. Marcus was different. Or at least, I thought he was. He wasn't flashy or loud. He listened. Really listened. He noticed small things, remembered details, made me feel like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt before. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things could be different. I didn't tell Vanessa about him. Not at first. I was careful. We kept things quiet, private, away from the noise. But again, it didn't matter. She found out. I don't even remember how. Maybe through social media, maybe through mutual acquaintances. It didn't take much. Once she knew, it was only a matter of time. She reached out to him. Said she wanted to get to know the person her sister cared about. Said it in that soft, innocent tone she always used. The one that made people trust her instantly. Marcus told me about it at first. laughed it off. Said it was a little strange but harmless. I should have known better. Within days something shifted. His messages became shorter, his calls less frequent. He started cancelling plans, always with reasonable excuses. Work, stress, timing. All believable, all familiar. Then one evening I saw them together. It wasn't even hidden. They were sitting at a cafe close enough that their shoulders touched. Vanessa was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Marcus looked conflicted. Not happy, not fully comfortable, but not pulling away either. That was the moment I stopped pretending. I didn't confront them. There was no point. I had lived this story too many times. I already knew the ending. A week later, he told me he needed space. 2 weeks later, he was gone. And Vanessa, she lost interest soon after. That's when something inside me changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift. A realization that nothing I had done so far had worked. Ignoring her didn't stop her. Avoiding her didn't protect me. Being patient, understanding, forgiving had only made me easier to hurt. For the first time, I asked myself a different question. What if I stopped playing by the rules? What if, instead of running from her, I let her run exactly where I wanted her to go? The idea didn't come fully formed. It started as a thought. A possibility I didn't immediately accept. But once it was there, it didn't leave. It grew, shaped itself, became clearer with every memory, every pattern I replayed in my mind. Vanessa didn't just take things randomly. She was drawn to a certain kind of target. Status. Power. Anything that made her feel like she had won something valuable. And that's when I realized if I wanted to end this, I couldn't just give her something to take. I had to give her something she wouldn't survive taking. The plan didn't come together overnight. It took time, patience, and more control than I had ever exercised before. I had to be careful. Precise. This wasn't about anger. Anger would have ruined everything. This was about understanding her better than she understood herself. I started paying attention again, watching from a distance. Not reacting, not engaging, just observing. What she posted, who she interacted with, the kind of men she gravitated toward. It was always the same pattern. Wealth, influence, attention. She didn't just want affection. She wanted the appearance of winning. And then, one evening, everything aligned. I was at a small gathering, nothing too formal, just a few acquaintances and quiet conversations. That's where I heard his name for the first time. Adrian Wolf. The way people spoke about him caught my attention immediately. Not admiration. Not exactly fear either. Something in between. Respect mixed with caution. They said he was brilliant. Ruthless. A man who built his empire from nothing and protected it with the kind of precision that left no room for mistakes. He didn't date publicly. Didn't entertain distractions. And when he did let someone into his world, it never lasted long. Not because they left, but because they couldn't stay. I didn't need to hear more. In that moment, I knew. Vanessa would never be able to resist someone like him. And Adrian, he wasn't the kind of man you could play games with and walk away untouched. For the first time in years, I felt something close to certainty. Not hope. Not excitement. Just a quiet, steady confidence. The game hadn't changed, I had. Jasmine didn't move too quickly after hearing Adrian Wolf's name. That was the first rule she set for herself. No rushing. No impulsive decisions. Vanessa thrived on chaos, on fast reactions and emotional mistakes. If Jasmine wanted this to work, she had to become the exact opposite. Slow, deliberate, invisible. For a few days, she did nothing. She went to work, answered emails, kept her routine intact. But underneath that calm surface, her mind was working constantly, replaying everything she had learned over the years. Every pattern Vanessa followed. Every weakness she exploited. Every predictable move she made when something valuable appeared in her orbit. Vanessa didn't chase randomly. She targeted. And more importantly, she couldn't resist a challenge. That was the key. Jasmine began her research quietly. Adrian Wolf wasn't the kind of man with an easily accessible life. There were no loud headlines about his relationships, no public displays of affection, no messy scandals. His presence online was controlled, curated, almost sterile. Business events, charity appearances, occasional interviews that revealed very little about who he actually was. But the silence around him spoke louder than anything else. Men like Adrian didn't advertise themselves. They didn't need to. Jasmine dug deeper, through articles, business forums, even old archived interviews that most people wouldn't bother reading. Patterns started to emerge. He valued control above everything. Precision. Efficiency. People were assets to him, not emotional connections. Useful until they weren't. She remembered the way people at that gathering had spoken about him. Careful with their words. Almost cautious. He doesn't like unpredictability. He doesn't tolerate weakness. He always wins. Those phrases stayed with her. And slowly the shape of her plan became clearer. Vanessa wasn't just drawn to powerful men. She was drawn to men she believed she could control. Men she could charm, manipulate, outplay. That's why she lost interest so quickly. Once she proved she could take them, they became boring. But Adrian wasn't like the others. He wouldn't bend. And Vanessa wouldn't realize that until it was too late. Jasmine didn't need to force anything. She just needed to create the illusion, a suggestion. A possibility strong enough to pull Vanessa in on her own. The first step was subtle. A conversation. Not even a direct one. She chose her moment carefully. A casual brunch with a mutual acquaintance, someone who moved in the same extended social circles as Vanessa. The kind of person who loved sharing information without realizing the weight of what they were passing along. Jasmine mentioned Adrian's name lightly, as if it barely mattered. "I met someone interesting at a client dinner last week," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Adrian Wolf." That was enough. The reaction came instantly. Raised eyebrows. A small pause. "Adrian Wolf?" Her acquaintance repeated. "That's not a name you hear casually." Jasmine gave a soft, almost dismissive smile. "He's different. Intense, but intriguing." She didn't say too much. That was important. Too much detail would make it feel forced. Instead, she let the conversation drift, leaving just enough behind to spark curiosity. She knew exactly what would happen next. Information like that didn't stay contained. It moved. It spread. It reached the people it needed to reach. And Vanessa was always listening. It didn't even take a full day. That evening, Jasmine's phone buzzed. Vanessa. The name alone used to make her tense. Now it just made her focused. She stared at the message for a moment before opening it. "Adrian Wolf. Since when do you know people like that?" Jasmine allowed herself a small, controlled smile. "Right on time." She didn't reply immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she waited. Let the curiosity build. Let Vanessa sit with the question a little longer. When she finally responded, her message was simple. "It's nothing serious. Just someone I met through work. Nothing serious." That phrase was intentional. Dismissive but not closed. Casual but not denying importance. Exactly the kind of ambiguity Vanessa couldn't resist. The next few days unfolded exactly as Jasmine expected. Vanessa became interested. Not openly at first. She never moved that way. Everything she did was calculated, even when it looked effortless. But Jasmine noticed the signs, the subtle shifts, the increased activity in certain social circles, the sudden appearance at events Vanessa normally wouldn't attend. She was searching. And more importantly, she was closing in. Jasmine didn't interfere. She didn't guide. She simply allowed it to happen. Every move Vanessa made only pulled her deep into the path that had already been set. Then came the confirmation. A post. It was small, almost insignificant to anyone else. A photo from an upscale event. Elegant lighting. Expensive surroundings. Vanessa standing slightly turned, smiling just enough to look natural but still intentional. And in the background, blurred but unmistakable, Adrian Wolf. Jasmine stared at the image for a long moment. There it was. The beginning. Vanessa had found him. Or rather, she believed she had. Jasmine set her phone down slowly, her expression calm, unreadable. This was the point where everything could have gone wrong. If she interfered too much, if she pushed too hard, Vanessa might sense something. But she didn't need to. Vanessa was already doing the work herself. Days turned into weeks. The signs became more obvious. Vanessa's posts changed. More exclusive locations. More subtle hints of luxury. Glimpses of a life that suggested proximity to power without ever stating it directly. She was building the image. Claiming the victory before it was even complete. Jasmine watched it all quietly, never reacting. And then, finally it happened. Vanessa called her. Not a text this time. A call. Jasmine let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. Hey, she said calmly. Vanessa's voice came through bright, almost glowing with excitement. You've been quiet, she said. Busy? Just work, Jasmine replied. There was a brief pause, like Vanessa was deciding how much to reveal. Then she couldn't hold it in any more. I've been seeing someone, she said. Jasmine leaned back slightly, her tone steady. Oh, Adrian, Vanessa said, letting the name sit between them. Of course. Jasmine kept her voice neutral. I see. You didn't think I'd meet him, did you? Vanessa added, a hint of amusement slipping through. Jasmine didn't take the bait. I didn't think about it at all, she said. That answer landed exactly how it needed to. Not defensive, not impressed, dismissive. Vanessa hated that. Well, Vanessa continued, her tone sharpening slightly, he's different, not like the others. Jasmine almost smiled. I'm sure he is. Vanessa went on, talking about him in that familiar way. Admiration wrapped in subtle competition. Every word carefully chosen to sound casual, but carrying the underlying message she always wanted Jasmine to hear. I took something you couldn't keep, but this time it was different. Because Jasmine wasn't losing anything. She was watching something unfold exactly as planned. After the call ended, she sat in silence for a few minutes, no excitement. No satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of completion for the first phase. Vanessa believed she had won again. That belief was necessary. Because without it, she might have hesitated, and hesitation would have ruined everything. The next phase didn't require Jasmine to do much at all. Adrian would take care of it. Men like him didn't enter relationships casually. They didn't invest time or attention without purpose. And once someone entered his world, they didn't control the pace anymore. Vanessa didn't understand that yet. She still believed she was leading. Still believed she was choosing. Still believed she could walk away whenever she wanted. Jasmine knew better. She had seen the type before. Not exactly like Adrian, but close enough to recognize the pattern. Control disguised as calm. Power expressed through silence. And the most dangerous part, patience. Vanessa had never dealt with someone like that. She wouldn't see it coming. Jasmine stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the quiet street below. Everything felt still, as if the world had paused just long enough for something irreversible to begin. She didn't feel guilty. That surprised her, at first. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She hadn't forced anything. She hadn't lied. She hadn't pushed Vanessa into something against her will. She had simply allowed her to follow the same path she always chose. The difference was where that path now led. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, taking a slow breath. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ending something that had been happening for years. And for the first time, she wasn't the one being pulled into the chaos. She was standing outside of it, watching, waiting, knowing, because this time, Vanessa hadn't taken something from her. She had taken something she couldn't control, and that was where everything would finally change. The shift didn't happen overnight. If anything, it was so subtle at first that Vanessa almost mistook it for something else. Something exciting, something new. That was how it always began with men like Adrian. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. Just a quiet change in the air, like stepping into a room where everything looked the same but somehow felt different. At the beginning, everything seemed perfect. More than perfect, actually. Refined. Controlled. Impressive in a way that fed directly into Vanessa's need to feel like she had won something rare. Adrian didn't shower her with constant attention the way other men had. He didn't flood her phone with messages or chase her approval. Instead, he appeared when he wanted, spoke when he chose, and left just enough silence behind to make her lean forward, wanting more. Vanessa told herself this was different because it was better. Because he was different. Because she had finally found someone worth the effort. That belief kept her from noticing the details that didn't quite fit. Like the way he never asked personal questions. Not really. He listened when she spoke, but his silence didn't feel curious. It felt measured, like he was collecting information rather than sharing a moment. Or the way he chose everything for them. The restaurants, the time, the pace of their meetings. At first, it felt like confidence, like leadership, something she could admire. But slowly, almost invisibly, it became something else. Control. The first time she felt it clearly was during a dinner at a private club downtown. She had spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress that she knew would turn heads. It always worked before. It was part of her identity. The way she entered a room and immediately owned it. When she stepped out, Adrian looked at her for a moment, just a moment. No smile, no compliment. Then, he said calmly, change. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. What? The dress, he said, already turning away. It's not right for tonight. There was no anger in his tone. No explanation either. Just a simple statement, as if the decision had already been made. Vanessa felt something tighten in her chest. Not quite anger. Not quite confusion. Something unfamiliar. Why? She asked. Adrian paused, glancing back at her. Because I said so. Silence filled the space between them. For a second, she considered pushing back. That was who she was, after all. Someone who didn't take orders, someone who controlled the dynamic. But then she thought about everything else. His status. His influence. The way people reacted to him. The way being with him elevated her, placed her in a different category entirely. And just like that, she smiled lightly. Fine, she said. Give me a minute. That was the moment the balance shifted, not dramatically. Not in a way that would alarm anyone watching from the outside. But internally something had moved. She had adjusted, and Adrian had noticed. After that, the changes came more frequently. Small things at first. He would reschedule her meetings without asking, claiming it made more sense for both of them. He would suggest different outfits, different styles, slowly shaping her appearance into something more aligned with his preferences. He didn't criticize directly. He didn't need to. His approval came quietly when she complied, and his silence followed when she didn't. Vanessa told herself she was adapting, growing, becoming part of something bigger. But the truth was simpler. She was losing pieces of herself one decision at a time. Jasmine, meanwhile, stayed exactly where she had positioned herself, outside of it all. She didn't reach out, didn't ask questions, didn't react to the subtle changes she could see from a distance. Vanessa's social media told enough of the story on its own. The posts became less frequent but more curated, more controlled. Less of Vanessa's usual bold personality, more of a polished, almost restrained version of her. Jasmine noticed it immediately. That wasn't Vanessa's style, which meant one thing. Adrian was shaping the narrative, and Vanessa was letting him. Weeks passed, and came the next step. Adrian invited Vanessa to his estate. He didn't present it as something special. There was no excitement in his voice, no sense of occasion. Just a simple statement. You'll stay with me for a while. Not a question. A decision. Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to feel it, that flicker of uncertainty. But it disappeared just as quickly, because this was what she wanted, wasn't it? Access. Proximity. Proof that she had secured something no one else could. So she agreed. The estate was everything she expected and more. Expansive, secluded, designed with a kind of precision that made every detail feel intentional. It was beautiful, but not warm, impressive, but not inviting. Still, Vanessa smiled as she stepped inside. This was her victory. At least that's what she believed. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Adrian wasn't constantly around. He came and went without explanation, leaving Vanessa in a space that felt both luxurious and strangely isolating. The staff was polite but distant. Efficient, professional. They spoke when necessary, but never more than that. Vanessa tried to fill the silence. She explored the estate, took photos, adjusted to the new environment. But something felt off. It was subtle, like everything else. The Wi-Fi was limited. Certain apps on her phone stopped working. Calls didn't always go through. At first, she blamed the location, the distance from the city, until she realized Adrian had full connectivity, and she didn't. When she asked him about it, he didn't deny it. I prefer fewer distractions, he said simply. Vanessa laughed lightly, trying to keep things normal. You could have mentioned that. I just did. Again, no anger, no apology, just control. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, thinking. Something wasn't right. But every time that thought formed fully, she pushed it away. Because accepting it meant admitting something she wasn't ready to face, that she wasn't in control anymore. Days turned into weeks. The isolation deepened. Her world became smaller, quieter, more contained. Adrian didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to threaten or demand, he simply adjusted things. Until her options became limited, until her independence became optional. And slowly, the realization began to settle. This wasn't like the others. This wasn't a game she could win. Jasmine felt the shift before she saw it. It was in the silence. Vanessa stopped reaching out completely. No messages, no calls, no subtle attempts to provoke or compete. That alone was enough to confirm everything. Vanessa was fully immersed, fully occupied. Jasmine sat on her couch one evening, her phone resting beside her, untouched. She didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. What she felt was something quieter, final. For years, everything had been a cycle, predictable, repetitive, exhausting. Now, for the first time, that cycle had broken. Not because Vanessa had changed, but because she had finally met something she couldn't overpower. Jasmine stood and walked to the window again, the same place she had stood weeks ago when the plan had just begun. The city looked the same. Nothing had changed on the surface, but everything underneath it had shifted. She thought about reaching out. Just once, to check, to confirm, but she didn't. Because she already knew. Some lessons couldn't be interrupted. Some endings needed to unfold on their own. Vanessa had spent years taking, proving, winning. Now she was in a place where none of those things mattered. Where charm didn't work. Where control didn't belong to her. And where walking away might not be as simple as she had always believed. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her reflection faint in the glass. This wasn't revenge. Not anymore. This was consequence. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one paying for it. By the second month, Vanessa stopped counting days. Time inside the estate didn't move the way it used to. There were no spontaneous plans, no unexpected invitations, no late-night messages pulling her into another version of excitement. Everything followed a rhythm she hadn't chosen but slowly started to follow. Wake up early. Breakfast already prepared. Silence at the table. Adrian either present and unreadable or gone without explanation. Hours stretching into nothing. Evening structured around his schedule. Conversations that felt less like connection and more like evaluation. At first, she resisted internally. She told herself this was temporary, that she was just adjusting. That once she understood how Adrian operated, she would find her way back into control. But every attempt she made quietly dissolved. She tried calling friends. The calls didn't go through. She tried messaging people from alternative apps. No response. She asked the staff for help once casually as if it were nothing serious. The response was polite and empty. Mr. Wolf prefers minimal outside communication during certain periods. That was the moment something colder settled in her chest. Not fear yet, but awareness. Vanessa had always been quick to adapt, but this wasn't adaptation anymore. This was containment. She began noticing details she had ignored before. The cameras. They were placed discreetly, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Small black lenses tucked into corners, hidden in design elements. Watching quietly without drawing attention. At first, she convinced herself they were for security. A place like this would obviously need protection. But then she noticed something else. They followed her. Not physically moving, but always present in the spaces she occupied. The angles, the coverage. There was no corner she could truly disappear into. One afternoon, she stood in the hallway and stared directly at one of them. Just stared. For a long moment. As if daring it to look away. It didn't. That was the first time she felt it fully. Fear. Not loud or overwhelming. Just a quiet realization that she was being watched in a way that had nothing to do with safety. That evening, Adrian returned earlier than usual. He found her sitting in the living room, her posture tense, her eyes sharper than they had been in weeks. "You're thinking too much," he said, removing his jacket calmly. Vanessa looked up at him. "There are cameras everywhere." "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "For security? For awareness?" he corrected. The difference in wording didn't sit right. Vanessa stood up slowly. That's not normal. Adrian studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Normal is subjective. No, she said, her voice tightening. This isn't how people live. He walked closer, stopping just within her space but not touching her. This is how I live, he said quietly. And you chose to be here. The words landed heavier than they should have. Because they were true. She had chosen this. She had walked into it willingly. And for the first time, she couldn't twist that reality into something else. I can leave, she said, testing the statement more than asserting it. Adrian didn't react immediately. He simply looked at her, calm, composed, as if considering something insignificant. Of course, he said finally. Relief flickered in her chest. Until he added, when I decide it's appropriate. The silence that followed felt different, thicker, heavier. Vanessa didn't respond. She couldn't. Because something inside her had just shifted again. This wasn't a relationship. This wasn't even a power dynamic she could manipulate. This was control in its purest form. And she was inside it. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts louder than they had been in years. Memories started creeping in. Not of Adrian, but of Jasmine. Moments she had dismissed before. Times she had laughed, taken, walked away without thinking twice. She had always believed she was in control of those situations, that she was simply better at playing the game. But now, lying in that silent room, she saw it differently. She hadn't been playing a game. She had been running from something. From emptiness. From the need to feel like she was winning something, even if it meant taking it from someone else. And Jasmine had always just endured it. Until she didn't. Vanessa turned onto her side, her breathing uneven. For the first time she wondered, had this been intentional? The thought came slowly, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. Jasmine had mentioned Adrian once, just once, casually, and then stepped back completely. Too completely. Vanessa sat up suddenly, her heart racing. No, that wasn't possible. Or was it? She replayed the timeline in her head. The way she had discovered Adrian. The way everything had unfolded so smoothly, almost too perfectly. The realization didn't come all at once, it built. Piece by piece. Until it formed something she couldn't push away anymore. She hadn't found Adrian. She had been led to him. And she had followed without hesitation. A quiet, hollow laugh escaped her lips. Not because it was funny, but because it was so fitting. All those years of taking, of proving, of winning. And now she had walked straight into something she couldn't take back. The next morning, she tried to leave again. Not impulsively this time. Carefully. She waited until the house was quiet, until Adrian had left for the day. She packed only what she needed, nothing that would slow her down. Her movements were precise, controlled. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't acting on impulse. She was thinking, planning, surviving. She made it to the front entrance. Her hand reached for the door. And then, it didn't open. She tried again. Nothing. Her chest tightened. She moved quickly to another exit. Locked. Another. Locked. Her breathing became shallow faster. This wasn't inconvenience. This was design. Panic started creeping in, sharp and unfamiliar. She turned, scanning the room as if something might suddenly change. Nothing did. The house remained exactly the same. Silent. Controlled. Watching. That's when she heard it. Adrian's voice. Close. Leaving without telling me. Vanessa froze. She hadn't heard him enter. Slowly she turned around. He stood a few feet away, hands relaxed, expression unchanged. How long have you been there? She asked, her voice barely steady. Long enough, he replied. The silence stretched again. Vanessa forced herself to stand straighter, to regain some sense of control. I'm leaving, she said. Adrian nodded once. I understand the feeling. Then let me go. He stepped closer, not aggressively, just enough to remind her of the space he occupied. You still think this works the way you're used to, he said. Her jaw tightened. What does that mean? It means, he continued, you're used to entering situations, taking what you want, and walking away when it stops entertaining you. Each word felt deliberate, accurate, uncomfortably so. This isn't that, he added. Vanessa held his gaze, refusing to look away. Then what is it? Adrian's expression didn't change. "This," he said quietly, "is something you agreed to without understanding." Her heart pounded against her chest. "I didn't agree to this." "Yes," he said calmly. "You did. You just didn't read the terms." The weight of that sentence settled heavily, because she knew what he meant. The documents, the agreements, the things she had signed without fully paying attention, because she had been focused on winning. And now she was living inside the consequences of that decision. Vanessa felt something break inside her, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control, she wasn't winning. She wasn't even playing the same game anymore. And somewhere far from that silent estate, Jasmine sat in a quiet room, her life finally untouched, not because she had fought harder, but because she had stepped out of the cycle entirely. Vanessa lowered her gaze slightly, her voice softer now. "I want out." Adrian didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her, evaluating, calculating. And then, finally, "We'll see," he said. Those two words carried more weight than anything else he had said, because they didn't promise anything, they didn't confirm anything. They only reminded her she wasn't the one making decisions anymore. The days after that didn't blur, they stretched. Every hour felt like it had edges, sharp and deliberate, as if time itself had been redesigned to remind Vanessa where she was and what she had lost. The estate didn't change, but she began to see it differently. What once looked like elegance now felt like calculation. What once felt exclusive now felt isolating. She stopped trying to test the doors. That phase passed quickly, replaced by something quieter and more dangerous: observation. If Adrian controlled everything, then understanding him was the only way forward. Vanessa began paying attention the way she never had before. Not to impress, not to manipulate, but to survive. She noticed his routines, the way his day unfolded with precision. He woke early, always before sunrise. He didn't linger over meals. He didn't engage in unnecessary conversation. Even his pauses felt intentional, as if silence itself was a tool he used to shape the space around him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Control didn't come from force, it came from certainty. That was what unsettled her the most. There was no chaos to fight against. No emotional outburst she could exploit. No weakness she could lean into. Just structure. And she was trapped inside it. One afternoon she found herself sitting in the study, a room Adrian rarely used in her presence. It was lined with books she hadn't touched, documents she didn't understand, and a desk that felt more like a command center than a workspace. She didn't know why she went there. Maybe because it felt like the closest thing to answers. She opened drawers slowly, carefully, as if the room itself might react to her curiosity. Most of what she found meant nothing. Contracts, reports, names she didn't recognize, until she found something that did. A folder. Thin, simple. With her name on it. Vanessa froze. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her fingers hovering over the surface without touching it. Something inside her told her not to open it. That whatever was inside would change something she couldn't change back, but she had already crossed too many lines to stop now. She opened it. The first page wasn't what she expected. It wasn't legal language or business terms. It was information, personal, detailed. Her past relationships, names, dates, patterns, notes written in a handwriting that wasn't hers, observations about her behavior, her tendencies, her choices. Vanessa felt her stomach drop. He had been studying her. Not since they met. Before that. Much before that. She flipped through the pages faster now, her breath uneven. There were references to people she hadn't spoken to in years. Moments she barely remembered. Things she had said, done, forgotten. All documented. All analyzed. This wasn't a relationship. This wasn't even an accident. This was intentional. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached the last page. There was only one line written there. She seeks control through possession. Remove the illusion of control, and the structure collapses. Vanessa dropped the folder onto the desk. Her chest felt tight, her mind racing faster than she could keep up with. This had never been about chance. He hadn't just met her. He had chosen her. The realization hit harder than anything else so far. Because it meant one thing. She hadn't just walked into a trap. She had been the target. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. She stepped back, her breathing shallow, her thoughts spiraling into places she couldn't control. Why her? What did he want? And the question she didn't want to ask, was Jasmine part of this? The thought lingered longer this time. He had known things about her past. Things that weren't public. Things that would be hard to find unless someone pointed him in the right direction. Vanessa pressed her hands against the desk, grounding herself. No, she couldn't think like that. Or maybe she had to. Because nothing about this situation was random anymore. That night, she didn't wait for Adrian to come to her. She went to him. His office door was open this time. He sat behind the desk, reading something on his screen, completely composed, as if the world outside of his immediate focus didn't exist. Vanessa stepped inside slowly. He didn't look up right away. "I found the file," she said. Silence. Then, calmly, he closed the document in front of him and looked at her. "I assumed you would eventually." Her jaw tightened. "You've been watching me." "Yes." The simplicity of his answer made it worse. "For how long?" "Long enough to understand you." Vanessa felt anger rise, sharp and unfamiliar in its intensity. "You don't get to understand me like that. You don't even know me." Adrian leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. "I know exactly what you choose to show," he said. "And more importantly, I know why." "That doesn't give you the right." "Rights," he interrupted quietly, a matter of perspective. The conversation felt like it was slipping away from her, just like everything else. "Why me?" she demanded. That was the real question, the one that mattered. Adrian studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Because you were predictable," he said. The words landed harder than any insult. "Predictable," she repeated. "You follow patterns," he continued. "You pursue validation through control. You take what belongs to others because it confirms something you don't want to face." Vanessa shook her head, her voice unsteady. "That's not." "It is," he said, not raising his tone, not forcing the point. "And you've built your entire identity around it." The truth in his words cut deeper than she expected. Not because she agreed, but because part of her recognized it. And she hated that. "You think this is some kind of lesson?" she asked, her voice lower now. Adrian replied, "This is a consequence." The word echoed in the room. Heavy, final. Vanessa felt something inside her shift again. Not fear this time, not panic, something else, something quieter. Clarity. For the first time since this began, she stopped trying to fight the situation the way she always had. She stopped trying to win. Because there was no winning here. There was only understanding. And maybe a way out. "How do I leave?" she asked. The question came out differently this time. Not demanding, not entitled, just real. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He watched her carefully, as if measuring something he hadn't seen before. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" "On whether you're still trying to leave the same way you entered." Vanessa frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, standing slowly, "if you're still looking for control, you won't find an exit." The room felt quieter now. Not oppressive, just still. Vanessa lowered her gaze for a moment, her thoughts settling into something steadier. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a strategy. She didn't have a move. She didn't have a way to turn the situation in her favor. All she had was the truth, and the realization that everything she had built her identity on didn't work here. She looked back up at him. "I don't want control," she said quietly. The words felt strange, unfamiliar, but real. "I just want my life back." Adrian didn't respond immediately, but something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest that something had changed. Maybe not in the situation, but in her. And somewhere far from that estate, Jasmine stood on a quiet balcony, the city stretching out in front of her, untouched, unchanged. Her phone rested on the table behind her, silent. For the first time in years, there was nothing pulling her back into chaos. No interruptions, no shadows waiting to take what she had. Just stillness, peace. She didn't know exactly what was happening inside that estate, but she knew one thing for certain: Vanessa was facing something she had never faced before. Herself. And sometimes, that was the hardest thing to escape. Something shifted after that conversation. Not in the house. Not in Adrian. The structure remained the same, cold and precise, untouched by emotion. But inside Vanessa, something that had been tightly wound for years began to loosen, slowly, painfully. For the first time, she stopped looking for angles. Stopped searching for weaknesses in others. Stopped calculating how to turn situations in her favor. Because there was nothing here to manipulate. Only herself. The days that followed felt different. Not easier, not lighter, but clearer. The silence in the estate no longer felt like a threat pressing in on her. It felt like something else entirely, space. Uncomfortable space, but space nonetheless. She began to notice things she had ignored before. The way she reacted to quiet. The way her thoughts rushed to fill emptiness with imagined conversations, victories, scenarios where she was admired, chosen, envied. It had always been like that, even before the men, before the attention, before the need to take what wasn't hers. Vanessa had never known how to just exist without needing to prove something. That realization stayed with her. It followed her through the halls, into the mornings, into the long hours where nothing happened and everything surfaced. One afternoon, she found herself standing in front of a mirror again. But this time, she didn't adjust her appearance. Didn't tilt her head or search for the most flattering angle. She just looked. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't immediately recognize the person staring back. Not because she had changed physically, but because the version of herself she had always presented, the confident, untouchable, always in control version, wasn't there. What was left felt uncertain, unfinished, human. Her chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from something closer to grief. Grief for a version of herself that had never really been real. That night, when Adrian joined her for dinner, she didn't perform. She didn't smile in that practiced way, didn't try to guide the conversation or fill the silence. She simply sat, present. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. You've changed your approach, he said calmly, cutting into his meal. Vanessa looked up at him. I stopped pretending, she replied. There was no challenge in her voice, no hidden intention, just truth. Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Good, that was all. No praise, no elaboration, but it was enough. Because for the first time, she wasn't looking for approval. The next morning something unexpected happened. Her phone rang. Vanessa stared at it, confused. It had been silent for so long that the sound felt foreign. She picked it up slowly, a number she recognized, but hadn't seen in months. Jasmine. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she answered. Hello. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if Jasmine hadn't expected her to pick up. Vanessa, she said finally. Her voice was calm. Careful. How are you? The question felt strange, simple, but loaded. Vanessa didn't answer immediately, because for the first time she didn't have a quick response. I don't know, she said honestly. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. I heard you've been away, Jasmine said. Vanessa let out a small breath. Something like that. Another pause. Then Jasmine spoke again. I wasn't sure if I should call. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. You didn't have to. I know, Jasmine replied, but I wanted to. There was something different in her tone. No tension, no underlying competition, just distance. And something softer beneath it. Vanessa swallowed, her voice quieter now. Did you know? The question came out before she could stop it. Jasmine didn't answer immediately, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. You did, Vanessa said softly. I suspected, Jasmine replied, suspected. Vanessa let out a short, hollow laugh. You led me to him. Jasmine's voice didn't change. I didn't force you. No, Vanessa admitted. You didn't. Another silence. This one heavier. I spent years taking things from you, Vanessa continued. And you just let me walk into this? Jasmine's response was quiet. I stopped trying to stop you. That truth landed deeper than anything else. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her grip on the phone loosening. I thought I was winning, she said. I know, Jasmine replied. Vanessa's eyes stung, But no tears came. I wasn't, she added. No, Jasmine said gently. You weren't. The honesty between them felt different now. Not sharp, not defensive, just clear. Vanessa took a slow breath. I'm not the same, she said. I can hear that, Jasmine replied. That simple acknowledgement meant more than any apology. Because it wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't closure. It was recognition. And for the first time, that was enough. They didn't talk much longer. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been understood. When the call ended, Vanessa sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. But something inside her felt lighter, not fixed. Not healed, but lighter. That evening Adrian found her in the same place, quiet, still. You spoke to her. He said it wasn't a question. Vanessa nodded. Yes, and. She thought about it for a moment, then said, I don't need to take anything from her anymore. Adrian watched her carefully. Why? Vanessa's answer came without hesitation. Because I finally understand what she had. And what was that? He asked. Vanessa looked up, her expression steady. Peace. The word settled into the space between them. Adrian didn't respond right away, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost unnoticeable. You're beginning to see clearly, he said. Vanessa let out a quiet breath. It cost me everything. Yes, Adrian replied. That's usually how it works. There was no cruelty in his tone, just fact. Vanessa stood slowly. For the first time since arriving, her movements didn't feel restricted. They felt intentional. I still want to leave, she said. Adrian nodded. I know. And he held her gaze for a moment. Then said something he hadn't said before. Then leave. Vanessa didn't move at first, because she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. The doors are open, he added. Her heart started beating faster. Not from panic, from something else. Caution. Hope. She walked toward the entrance slowly. Every step measured, half expecting something to stop her. To change, to close again. But when she reached the door, it opened, just like that. No resistance. No barrier. Nothing holding it shut. Vanessa stood there, staring at the space beyond. The world she had been cut off from. The world she had taken for granted. She didn't rush out. She didn't run. She simply stood there for a moment, taking it in. Then she stepped forward. Out the air felt different. Lighter. Real. She didn't look back immediately. But when she did, Adrian was still standing inside, watching, not stopping her, not calling her back. Just observing. Vanessa held his gaze for a second, then turned away, and walked forward. Not as the woman she had been before. Not as the version who needed to win, to take, to prove. But as someone who had lost everything, and finally understood what mattered. Miles away, Jasmine sat on her balcony once more. The same view, the same quiet. But this time something felt complete. Her phone rested beside her. Still, she didn't need to check it. Didn't need to wonder. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to take. Nothing left to lose. Only what remained, and what remained was hers. Vanessa drove for hours before she stopped. She didn't know where she was going at first. She only knew she needed distance, not just from the estate, but from the version of herself that had entered it. The road stretched ahead in long, empty lines, and for once, she didn't mind not knowing the destination. There was something honest about that uncertainty. Something stripped clean. By the time she pulled into a small roadside inn, just outside a town she'd never heard of, the sky had already turned soft and grey. The building was plain, forgettable, the kind of place she once would have mocked without a second glance. Faded paint. A flickering vacancy sign. Flower pots out front that had been watered but not arranged. It should have felt like a fall from everything she had known. Instead, it felt like relief. Inside, the woman at the desk smiled without recognition. No pause. No narrowed eyes trying to place her face. No shift in posture that said status mattered. She simply handed Vanessa a key and asked if she wanted tea brought up later. Vanessa almost cried at the kindness of being treated like no one. Her room was small. A bed, a dresser, thin curtains, and a narrow balcony overlooking a parking lot and a line of distant hills. Nothing impressive, nothing curated, nothing designed to overwhelm. She set her bag down and sat at the edge of the bed in silence. For years, Silence had always been something she tried to defeat. She filled it with flirting, performance, provocation, noise. If a room went quiet, she made sure eyes turned toward her. If someone found peace, she tested how easily it could be disturbed. She had lived like that so long it had started to feel natural. Now, in that plain room, the silence stayed exactly where it was, and she let it. The first few days were harder than she expected. Freedom, she discovered, was not the same thing as ease. She woke up each morning with the same jolt of fear, her body still braced for locked doors, for cameras, for a voice behind her saying her choices weren't hers. Even after remembering where she was, even after realizing no one was watching, her hands still shook when she reached for the door knob. Trauma, she learned, didn't leave the moment the gate opened. It followed. In the mirror, she looked like someone recovering from a long illness. Her hair was dull. Her face had lost the sharp confidence she used to shape so carefully. Her eyes, once always searching for advantage, now looked tired enough to tell the truth. On the fourth morning, she found a small bookstore on the edge of town. It was quiet, cluttered, warm in a way expensive places never were. An old man stood behind the counter, reading, glasses low on his nose, a half-finished crossword puzzle beside the register. He nodded when she entered and went right back to his page. That simple lack of interest steadied her more than sympathy would have. She started going there every day, at first just to sit, then to read, then to write. Not about Adrian. Not immediately. Whenever she tried, the words came out jagged and cold, but not in the way she expected. The pain was there, yes. The control, the humiliation, the fear. But beneath all of it, something uglier waited to be acknowledged. She had not only been trapped by Adrian, she had been trapped by herself long before she met him. That truth took longer to write than any wound he gave her. One afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the bookstore windows, she wrote the first sentence that felt honest. I thought stealing from other people would make me feel less empty. She stared at the line for a long time after writing it. It looked small on the page. Too small for the damage it explained. The old man from the counter brought her tea without asking and placed it beside her notebook. "Storm staying a while," he said. "Good day to tell the truth." Vanessa almost laughed. If he knew, she thought. If he knew how long she had spent running from truth, turning it into charm, dressing it up as confidence, making herself impossible to question. But he didn't know, and somehow that made it easier. Days became weeks. Weeks moved more gently than months ever had. She stopped checking her phone every hour. Stopped wondering who had noticed her disappearance, who had replaced her, who was talking about her. The need to remain central in other people's minds faded slowly, like a bruise losing color. In its place came emptiness. Then, gradually, peace. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single morning where she woke up transformed. Healing came like the dawn in winter. Slow, pale, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She noticed it in little things. In how she no longer flinched when the innkeeper knocked to leave fresh towels. In how she could sit on the balcony for an hour and not once imagine someone watching her. In how she began choosing clothes for comfort instead of effect. And in how often Jasmine entered her mind. Not with resentment anymore. With clarity. She remembered things differently now. Not the way memory rewrites itself to make us innocent, but in the harsh, plain way that leaves no room to hide. The birthday dresses. The copied ribbons. The friends she pulled away just because she could. The boy she didn't even want, only wanted to take. Marcus. The smirks. The subtle cruelty. The satisfaction of seeing Jasmine go quiet. Back then, she called it winning. Now she saw what it was. Hunger. The kind that grows when a person doesn't know how to love themselves without comparison. The kind that turns another person's peace into something unbearable to witness. One evening, after closing her notebook, she finally did something she had avoided since leaving. She wrote Jasmine a letter. Not a text. Not a message she could delete, edit, or soften. A real letter in her own hand. Each word forced to exist physically where she could not hide from it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Even in this new honesty, she knew better than that. Forgiveness was not something she could request like a favor after years of damage. She wrote only what was true. That she understood now. That the thing Jasmine had always tried to protect was never the men, never the image, never the competition Vanessa imagined between them. It was her peace, and Vanessa had spent years trying to steal it because she had none of her own. When she sealed the envelope, her hands shook, not because she feared Jasmine's response, but because, for the first time, she didn't need one. Mailing it felt like laying something down she had carried too long. A month later, the old man in the bookstore asked if she had ever thought about helping with the women's writing circle that met behind the shop every Thursday evening. "They don't need a teacher," he said. "Just someone who understands that some stories are hard to say out loud the first time." Vanessa almost refused. The old instinct rose immediately: who am I to help anyone? But another instinct, quieter and newer, told her that maybe healing wasn't only about escaping. Maybe it was also about sitting still long enough to become useful without making everything about yourself. So she went. The women were younger and older than her, nervous and sharp and soft in different ways. One was leaving a marriage. One had lost her sister. One couldn't explain why she kept choosing men who made her feel small. Vanessa didn't offer speeches. She didn't center herself. She simply listened, the way no one had listened to Jasmine for years, the way she herself had once needed someone to listen without being dazzled or fooled. That became part of her life. Then another part. The innkeeper's daughter asked if Vanessa could help redesign the small yoga studio downtown. The bookstore owner let her organize a reading night. Someone else asked if she could photograph handmade scarves for an online page because you have an eye for details, even if you pretend you don't. For the first time, people were giving her pieces of their lives without her taking anything. That difference changed her more than pain had. Far away, Jasmine was learning her own kind of peace. Liam came into her life the way morning light enters a room that has been shut too long. Without force, without performance, simply because that is what light does when the curtains are finally opened. He was patient in a way that did not feel like pity. Solid in a way that did not feel possessive. He listened without trying to solve her. He loved without trying to own what he loved. The first time she told him about Vanessa, really told him, she expected the same reactions she had seen before. Shock, judgment, advice, curiosity dressed as concern. Instead, he only said, "You learned how to survive someone who confused love with theft." That doesn't mean love itself is dangerous. That sentence stayed with her. Months later, when they stood barefoot on a quiet beach exchanging vows with only a few close friends nearby, Jasmine did not look over her shoulder once. No shadow followed her. No rivalry stood at the edge of her joy, waiting to reach in and take something. When Liam said her name, it sounded like a home she had not known she deserved. After the wedding, back in their apartment, she found the letter from Vanessa among a stack of forwarded mail. She read it once slowly. Then again. She didn't cry. The years between them were too heavy for tears to fix. But she felt something close to mercy. Not reconciliation. Not reunion. Not the kind of ending stories often force on broken families to make the audience feel tidy. Just understanding. And maybe distance blessed enough to stay distance. She took the letter to the balcony that evening and burned it in a small clay dish. Not in anger. Not as punishment. But because some words only need to be received, not preserved. She watched the paper curl into ash, then opened her hand and let the wind take what remained. Winter passed. Spring arrived quietly. In the small town with one road in and one road out, Vanessa no longer introduced herself with hesitation. She used her real name again. Not because she had reclaimed some dramatic version of herself, but because she no longer needed to hide from a mirror. Her hair had grown softer around her face. Her clothes were plain. Her laughter, when it came, was rare but unforced. One morning she received a package with no note inside, only a framed photograph, a beach, white fabric caught in sea wind, Jasmine smiling at someone just outside the frame but easy to imagine. There was no bitterness in Vanessa as she looked at it. No urge to compare, no itch to step into the image and steal its center. Only gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. She sat on the edge of her bed with the photo in her lap and whispered the words she should have said years ago, to no one and exactly the right person. "I'm sorry. Then she placed the frame on the bookshelf above her desk and went downstairs to open the studio. That evening, as the town quieted and the hills darkened, Vanessa turned off the lights one by one. No cameras watched. No doors locked behind her. No one waited to test whether she had changed. She stepped outside, inhaled the cold, clean air, and stood there for a moment beneath a sky that asked nothing of her. Miles away, Jasmine laughed softly at something Liam said, the sound filling a warm room lined with books and photographs. She rested her head against the back of the couch and felt the old vigilance inside her finally go still. Neither sister got the life she once imagined. They got something harder, something truer. One learned too late that winning by taking leaves you starving. The other learned, after years of loss, that peace is still possible when you stop fighting to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. And somewhere between consequence and mercy, between escape and release, the story ended the only way it truly could. Not with revenge, not with triumph, but with two women, far apart, finally facing themselves honestly enough